This is the story of Jess Cooper. Jess is a UCLA Environmental Science student, and as a kid, she was always obsessed with animals, National Geographic documentaries, and the idea of exploring the outdoors. By the time she got to UCLA, she realized that the rigid structure of college wasn't fulfilling her the way nature did. She struggled with imposter syndrome, the pressure to perform academically, and the competitiveness of being in a top school like UCLA. So instead of forcing herself into a system that didn't fit, she paused college. She hiked 5 months at the Pacific Crest Trail, the PCT. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a 2,600 mile or almost 5,000 kilometer journey from Mexico to Canada. She faced dangerous snow conditions, physical exhaustion, and there were even times she told me that she didn't see a single person for days. She was actually the youngest and one of the less than 5% that made it through the forest that year. If that isn't enough, she's also spent time in the forests of Ecuador, setting up cameras for bears and wildcats. She's worked on collecting data on sea turtles. And I recently even saw a video of her completing a full day hike just drinking chocolate milk. She's literally so fun. She was one of the favorite people that I have deep dived with. Her story is just more than hiking or even loving the environment. I think it's about being brave. It's about putting what you want to do first. She embodies the idea that success isn't just about grades or careers. It's about growth, it's about exploration, and doing what truly makes you feel alive. Cheers to acknowledging students like Jess. Next up is Jess.
As a species have kind of totally removed ourselves from nature, and now it's a whole, and so a big part of our job was to be there, educate people, and make sure they're not killing the animals.
Must have been hard. What was the 5 months like? I need details and stories. I need a moment right now. Wait, so I want to know, why did we go on that specific trail? I know you've gone on so many different hikes. Why that one?
I think it's something that not a lot of people get to see. Again, it wasn't something that I could find online, and I had to go back into my photos. I was shown by a local that trail at one point, and so I thought it was kind of a very unique LA thing. It's very iconic. You can see, the ocean, and you can see downtown LA. So it felt like a good representation of Los Angeles, while also showing that, in 10, 15 minutes, you can still access nature, you can still get outside. Even if you don't have a car, like I've ridden my bike up to the trailhead and you can do it. So yeah. I think it's kind of a neat spot to show, even close by campus.
And I think we touched upon this on our hike, but every different hike has their own vibe to it. Like this one represents LA in the sense that you can see downtown and the sea, as well as even the Hollywood hike is to the Hollywood spot. So like, it's in itself a mix of representing LA and entertainment, and then also nature. What type of vibe do you like to be in when you're hiking? Is there a particular
like my
one?
Ideal hiking vibe?
Yeah.
Like I'll definitely admit my ideal hiking vibe probably isn't ones that have views of like buildings and cars and houses, but I would say definitely things that are really, really deep in the wilderness are my favorite times, where you can get really far out and you don't even have other people around. It feels very special, it feels very intimate, and you kind of lose the distractions of everything else but really what kind of like raw nature kind of is. And I think that's definitely my favorite. I think big mountains is where I really like to be.
Yeah, you talked about you really like Yosemite.
Yeah.
That's huge mountains. I went to Yosemite with my parents on like a road trip, and it was amazing. We went to Grand Canyon as well, just like a week ago actually.
Oh, nice.
And there's just something about being in something that's so much larger than yourself, which
100%.
makes you feel small but like part of something as well at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's pretty cool, I feel like. But I'm really interested to know, what's your background? You're from Long Beach, Anaheim, you said.
Yeah, I'm from
I'm
Anaheim
interested to
originally.
know how Jess evolved to be this person from that background.
Yeah.
What was that like?
No, that's a good question. How did I end up, just kind of living in the woods all the time? But I think I said this on like the initial call, but Like when I was a little kid, when I was a baby, my parents would always joke that I would only stop crying when I would go outside. And so even when I was like an infant, they would joke to all their like parents and other friends and stuff that when I grew up I was gonna be a park ranger, which is kind of funny because I feel like they're not that far off. Growing up, I was always not crazy outdoorsies, but I was really into animals when I was younger, and so I would do lots of very like nerdy reading and watching all my documentaries and that sort of stuff, and just kind of learning about all of it very theoretically. And then I think at some point I realized like, oh whoa, like you can go outside and experience nature. And I grew up camping quite a bit, but I was never a big hiker. And I think in probably my early teens, I started getting more into hiking, and it started off pretty gradually. I was doing, like 1-2 mile hikes, and that was a pretty big day. And then eventually, as I got older, I wanted to start finding ways to challenge myself. And so I would do harder hikes or longer hikes. I started getting into backpacking because I realized it was this whole other world of you can go out and instead of, having to drive to where you're camping, or instead of hiking and then coming back at the end of the day, you had this opportunity to hike out as far as you wanted, camp, and then you could continue hiking. And so you can get so much further than you can in a day. And I think that's really where my love of like backpacking and sort of like extended time in nature really comes from. But yeah, it's definitely been like a slow, gradual evolution. But I think just having a strong interest for like animals and nature when I was younger has really kind of transferred throughout the rest of my life.
Why do you think you have such a strong, or had such a strong affection towards animals and nature in general?
I think when I was younger, I was really introverted and I was pretty shy. So I think animals were very simplistic in the sense of, you didn't have to worry about who you're talking to. There's no judgment for animals at the end of the day. If they're mad at you, they'll bite you, So I think they seemed very simple to me, but also it was just really fascinating. It was one of those like kid obsessions where I loved learning about like venomous animals, and I loved seeing all the crazy, weird, wacky stuff. I was obsessed with Australia because they have everything that's deadly possible. And I think it was just really fascinating to me. And I think that sort of fascination turned into like a stronger passion and love when you start getting older and you start realizing like, oh, it's cool to learn about them, but realizing, especially in this day and age, how critical like conservation efforts are. I think that's where it sort of started becoming like truly like a passion over just like a hobby or an interest.
And it's really interesting how you said that your parents said you always started crying when you weren't in nature. Is there a specific memory from your childhood with nature that you really remember, or that your parents talk about all the time?
Nothing super specifically, but since I grew up camping, I think those are a lot of my fondest memories. Were just knowing that like once or twice a year, even if we weren't doing something that was like super crazy and extreme, I remember always being so excited, knowing that we were going to spend a day or two living out of a tent and eating pancakes and having like a campfire. And I think I loved the community aspect of it too, which I think has become like a really strong, important part of the outdoors now, where and especially as a kid, before I had a phone, I think it's a little bit different, but even still, it's the same sort of idea where when you're out in nature, you're not as connected, at least, to the digital world. And so, it's one of those things where whoever is around you in that moment really becomes your community, even if it's for like a weekend. And I think I experienced that even just on like group backpacking trips that I'm leading now, is you build a little community, even if it's for literally 36 hours. It feels so much stronger than I think almost anything else is, because you don't have any of the sort of external distractions.
That makes so much sense. Every time I've been on like on a week-long program for hiking or camping, it's always the first day where you feel like, oh, I've got to live without my phone. But after that, you feel like, oh, this is so much better, right?
It really is, because
and
you
you
really
get
connect to
so
people.
much connected to people, like you said, and to nature as well. What was the community back at home that you're talking about then?
I feel like just it kind of how it is anywhere, but just finding people who are like-minded. And I think, you're kind of asking how I ended up where I ended up. I think I found community in outdoorsy people, and I feel like those are people that I really connect to pretty easily, because you always, it's easy because you're sharing a love and a passion and an interest. But I think too, you find people who are outdoorsy tend to be more easygoing, or at least this is my personal experience. You find people that are more easygoing, people who are more willing to kind of put themselves in uncomfortable situations. And I think it's something that I really looked up to maybe when I was younger, and kind of saw that and was like, oh, like that's pretty cool. Like these people are doing these big hikes or these cool things. What if, I could do that too? And I think, part of it's just the inspiration. But yeah, I think kind of just trying to find a community and really finding that in people who are just kind of like-minded. And then as I got older, sort of trying to build a more like continual community that really felt like it all shared that similar
Totally.
thread.
And how was school for you? Was school also sort of involved into this camping, naturey side? There were trips from school.
A bit. I feel like when it came to school, I definitely noticed that I had like an affinity, or at least definitely more interest in, say, like biology, and I took marine bio in high school, and I think those were all pretty influential. I think it had a lot more probably to do with my extracurriculars, and things that I was involved with maybe outside of school that had a stronger thing. I feel like when I was younger, maybe I didn't notice the connections as much between like academics and their applications.
So what were academics like?
Interestingly enough, I didn't do traditional schooling. I was actually homeschooled.
Wow.
And so, yeah. And so it was definitely a pretty unique experience. I would go to school a couple times a week and have other kids I was around and learn from other people. It wasn't just me like at home taught by my mom all the time kind of thing. But I think it does make learning more personal. And so like that's how I was able to take like a marine bio class that might not have been offered at like my local community college. But I think like the main benefit might have been also I had more flexibility and time to go do extracurriculars. So I think my academics was definitely a bit non-traditional when I was younger, but I think overall I was kind of a nerdy kid, so I liked reading. And like I said, I think my first kind of interest in nature was all very theoretical, and it was me watching my documentaries and me reading books, which I definitely do think translates into like my academics too. I definitely would try and at least, whenever I
Yeah.
had a say in something, I would definitely always push towards that.
What type of documentaries and books do you like to read?
Oh, I'm so partial to anything like David Attenborough. So I loved
Oh
all the
wow.
Planet Earth
Same.
and the Blue Planets, like all of that kind of stuff. Nat Geo documentaries. I started collecting National Geographic magazines when I was younger. I think I have like a couple hundred of them at home or something.
Wow.
So it was something that I really liked. So I think it was kind of the intersection of like science and nature and all of that kind of stuff that I think I really did fall in love with.
You
The
know
outdoors.
something interesting that I just realized in my mind? The fact that you said you're homeschooled, I don't know if there's a connection here, but I feel like traditional school nowadays is, at least in India, back in my place, it was very, very STEM and science focused and very, oh, like the humanities take a back seat and a lot of the activities take a back seat and it's all about math and science and all
Yeah.
of these other hardcore subjects. Um, and it really deprives a lot of people of their tendency to do what they actually want to do sometimes.
Yeah.
A lot of students just don't know what they like because they've been pushed towards coding, even though coding is the thing of the future. Maybe not everybody is inclined towards that. Do you think just being homeschooled allowed you to do something that you were meant to do?
It's a really good question. I think I definitely have a lot of like personal critiques when it comes to maybe like non-traditional schooling as someone who's gone through it all. But at the same time, like I definitely see what you're saying, and I agree. I think a big part of it was because I wasn't necessarily confined to like a classroom 8-10 hours a day. I do think that kind of free time allowed me to maybe pursue more specific interests in things that I was interested in, and because my curriculum was really chosen by, obviously like my parents who were kind of dictating my learning. Maybe I did have a greater say than maybe I recognized, and so like I definitely do think that it allows you to have more time to pursue maybe things that you're more interested in.
Can you tell me a bit about the curriculum that you had and the schedule that you had as a student who was homeschooled? Because I'm really interested. I haven't talked to a lot of students who've been homeschooled,
No,
so
I
I
have
don't
not
know
met
a
almost
lot about it.
anyone else here. Yeah, I think when I was younger, it was much more like my parents were teaching me sort of thing. Because when you're like a little kid, obviously, you're not self-teaching. And so it'd be like probably a pretty traditional schedule. If we would start around like 8 a.m. and finish maybe at like 3. And that was pretty standardized, even
What
if it
did you
wasn't
guys
like
do from 8 to 3?
like your kind of traditional like basic stuff. Like when I was younger, it'd be like like reading, math, science, history, that kind of the basic subset of stuff. And then as I got older, especially once I started hitting around middle school, I was going to school or like to a sort of like co-op program a couple times a week. And so there I had teachers who were kind of taking over for more complex subjects. Obviously, as brilliant as my parents are, they might not be the most qualified to be teaching, physics, chemistry, higher level biology, and math. And so I would either do a combination of online courses, of college, especially in the last couple of years, I did some concurrent enrollment classes at like community college. And then I would also do some just like individualized study kind of stuff, where it was more like, here's a textbook, here's the kind of general layout of the class, here's your like test schedule or whatever it is, and it was very self-setting. And again, while there's a lot of like drawbacks to homeschooling, I do think that that was one of the benefits, especially coming to college, was having this sort of freedom. It was very similar, I guess, to how it is now, from sort of like probably like middle, junior high, and high school, where you have your assignments for the week, you know when they're due, you can get them done kind of whenever you want, but they got to get done. And so I think for me, I've always been a morning person, so it'd be me getting up in the mornings, maybe going on like a walk or whatever, and then trying to get my schoolwork done usually as early as possible, versus my sister, who was homeschooled with me, would always like sleep in, and then she preferred to do her stuff in like the afternoon and evening, which I do think is a big benefit of homeschooling. Is not everyone's a morning person and not everyone's a night person, and so being able to do stuff when you feel like you're most productive, I think is pretty critical as well. I think is a nice kind of benefit. But that was sort of, yeah, it was a good blend of things. A lot of self-teaching as well.
Nice. Tell me more about your parents and your sister.
Grew up in a pretty like traditional family. My sister is a couple years older than me. She's the only sibling I have. My mom's a special ed PE teacher, and my dad's done kind of a mix of different things. And I feel like we've gotten closer probably now that I've gotten older, which I think is nice, especially with my sister. Us siblings do. We didn't always get along the best when we were younger, but then as we got older, I think we sort of bonded and gone back, and now we do some stuff together. She'll go on hikes and stuff with me, so it's pretty fun.
Fun. Is there a favorite memory that you have of, you said you got closer to your family now?
Me and my sister specifically went on a trip to Costa Rica last year, or actually it was this past spring, which was really, really fun. I think that was a neat thing to kind of get to try. We didn't do a ton of traveling when I was younger, and so I think now that I'm older, and we're both older, and we have kind of like the money and the time, it's been fun to kind of go and explore things and do things together.
Fun.
And have kind of like a built-in person to do it with.
I just want to ask another question about the homeschooling versus traditional schooling stuff. You said you had a lot of critiques about traditional schooling, as well as some drawbacks about homeschooling. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think some of the critiques of homeschooling, a lot of them are pretty apparent in the sense of like, without maybe the money or resources. Homeschooling, it can be done in a lot of different ways. I think for people who aren't familiar, it seems like, oh, it's, you know, people wearing prairie dresses in their parents' basement all day, and it's not necessarily have to be like that. I do think at times maybe, especially going to such a competitive school as UCLA, I kind of do wish sometimes that I had a stronger foundation and maybe my math and sciences and that sort of stuff, especially going into a STEM program at UCLA. I wasn't able to take any AP or IB classes, and as far as I've met, I think I'm the only person here that has not done either of those two things, and I think maybe missing a bit of the academic rigor that traditional schooling would have provided would have been a nice thing just for sort of the transition into college and university. And the study techniques as well, I think, are probably a bit lacking. But again, I think that's also not necessarily just on homeschooling. It's probably on me too. Versus, I think some of the drawbacks of like traditional schooling, kind of how I've been talking about, is you're definitely pretty limited to whatever curriculum is offered. You're in a pretty highly competitive environment from a younger age, which I think can add just undue stress in general. And I think, yeah, just not having necessarily maybe the free time to do as many things. Even at the end of high school, like I worked a lot. I just worked like a fast food job. And I think having the sort of flexibility to do that too made a pretty big difference as far as coming to college and not having to stress so much about like finances, because now I have this money that I was able to save that maybe I wouldn't have been able to do if I was forced to be at school from 8 to 3, and then my extracurriculars were from, 3 to 9, which is what I experienced, or like a lot of my other friends I feel like kind of experienced more.
Yeah. If you could tell all students who are being homeschooled right now one thing, what would you tell them?
Don't limit yourself. I feel like I don't know a lot of other homeschoolers that ended up going to big universities, and I think my parents pushed it a lot harder than other people, which I'm very grateful for, in the sense of they really encourage us to go to college. They really encourage us to kind of work hard and apply to hard schools, even if again, like I haven't really met any other homeschool kids here. And so I would say, yeah, just don't, I think in general, even if you're not homeschooled, like don't limit yourself. If you want to do something, at least try. At the end of the day, at least you can say that much.
Yeah. I wonder if I'm trying to think, coming from that system to such a bureaucratic and scheduled and ordered system as UCLA might have been such a big change. And I guess that might have something to do with less people who are coming from homeschooled environments to
Definitely, but
schools
yeah,
like
I would
UCLA.
definitely think so as well. I think it's definitely a mix of things, but yeah, going from a school of like 50 people, that's like K through 12, and then coming, to a school of 40,000 is definitely intimidating. Again, I think the academics is definitely a bit harder. There are definitely some kids who are homeschooled who do the more like concurrent enrollment and dual enrollment. And I know some people who have done AP classes and that
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing, or even done a full IB. I just think it's more uncommon. But yeah, I think there's probably a few things that factor into it. But yeah, I don't know. More
Yeah.
more homeschoolers to consider UCLA maybe.
Yeah. Uh, you were also working at an aquarium for some time
Yeah,
back in before college.
yeah,
Tell me about that. Why an
yeah. I think that
aquarium?
was
How was it?
one of the most influential things that I've done, and I'm very grateful for. Especially my mom. She used to like drive me out, especially before I could drive, um, down to Long Beach, which is like a solid like 45-minute drive each way. Usually like once a week we would go down, and I would volunteer for on Saturdays between like 5 and 8 hours, and I think that was such a great experience because it's a very at the end of the day it's still a very professional world, and so to get that opportunity at the age of like 12 and 13, I think was pretty massive. Sort of having that expectation of the end of the day you're representing this this big institution, this public aquarium, and so you have to be professional, you have to kind of have your shit together, and so I think that was really cool in that sense as far as like a resume builder sort of thing. But I think way more than that and way deeper of that is it really solidified my sort of passion for, again, that started very much as like the wildlife sector is where I really was originally sort of following this path. But I think getting to experience a whole nother side of like environmental education, and aside from like showing that to the public, every single week we would have 30 minutes of our shift would be an educational presentation, and so we were continually learning things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think having so much of that be for like I think I ended up being there for probably like 4 years volunteering
Oh wow.
in the education department, and so it was an awesome experience. It also led to a lot of other opportunities. I had a day where they were like, hey, like we're doing this big restoration project on the Channel Islands, and so I got a full paid like boat ferry and everything to go out to the Channel Islands for a day and get to do some restoration work. And that was really cool to kind of see what like field work looks like and what conservation really looks like in action. Even at the aquarium behind the scenes stuff, we'd be like, oh, there's this breeding program with this, and we would get to see like that whole process
Mm-hmm.
and seeing the sort of academic side of it and the research being done. And I think just being so exposed to all of that kind of stuff was, yeah, I think deeply influential for my love of nature and animals.
What was your favorite part of being at the aquarium?
Oh, actually, that's a pretty easy one. I think seeing people get excited about stuff. I think one of our big positions in like the education department is, I don't know if you're familiar with the aquarium in the Pacific in Long Beach or any aquarium, but a lot of times they'll have like little like touch tanks where you can touch the animals.
Mm-hmm.
And so a big part of our job was to be there, educate people, and make sure they're not killing the animals. Because people sometimes were like very questionable in their intelligent levels when they would
Yeah.
touch things. But I think getting people who are really scared, especially adults, because I feel like kids were more likely to just like touch stuff and not really care.
Mm-hmm.
But you'd see adults being like, I'm not going to touch a shark. I'm not going to touch, like a jellyfish or whatever it is. And you would like convince someone, and then they would touch it and they would get kind of excited because they would realize it's not that scary.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would keep doing it, and you would see them after like 20 minutes get really comfortable with the animals and that sort of thing. And seeing that click, I think, was super cool because it'd be like, whoa, like I personally had such a direct effect on this person that now something that they were originally afraid of, such as like sharks, they now see as cool or cute or exciting. And I think that's really translated into my passion for the outdoors in like the education sector, where I really like taking people outside, because it's the same idea of I love seeing that click when people are like, oh, this is why you care about this. It's because it is cool and because it is so special.
Do you think we're more in common with animals and nature than we think?
Do I think like humans in general
Yeah,
are?
because I feel
Yeah.
like you talking about how it gives you fulfillment when you see people connect with animals or even just be less scared of them. It adds an emotional side to that person, which says,
No, definitely.
oh, like this is not that different from me and I can, touch it.
No, I think 100%. I think, I was saying maybe earlier, but I find it kind of odd how we've, as a species, have kind of totally removed ourselves from nature, and now it's a whole event when you go outside. It's a whole event when you see an animal, versus that used to be, day-to-day life. And not that we have to revert back to some sort of like primal thing, but we are part of nature, and at the end of the day, we are just a species. We're
Hmm.
one of many. And I think learning how things interact with each other and then going out and experiencing it is really critical because, like you're saying, you develop that sort of emotional side of it. And I think, as far as someone who really cares about the environment and about conservation, having people care is the number one way you're going to make a difference. Because if you can get everyone to care even just a teeny tiny bit more by not being afraid of something or by being at least appreciative of something, they might, give a bit more thought into their personal decisions, their personal maybe like voting choices, that sort of thing. So
Hmm.
I think the emotional side of it is super critical.
Yeah. And then came UCLA.
And they came to UCLA.
Why did you decide to apply to a research heavy, kind of a STEM focused school as well, in some ways? Obviously, it's a liberal arts, but why UCLA? And was there a focus on applying for a major that was in the environmental or wildlife side? What was going through your head?
No, very good question. I applied to because I come from a lower income background, you get like fee waivers for applications, and so I got 4 for the Cal States and 4 for the UCs. And so I applied to like 4 Cal States. I don't even totally remember which ones I applied to, but I applied to those. And none of them had programs that I was like super passionate about. They were all like kind of either environmental science or that sort of related field. But none of them were like super drawing. And I originally thought I was going to go to UC Santa Cruz.
Mhm.
And I'm a senior now, but when I was applying, it was during kind of the havoc and mess of COVID, which meant that like scores and everything from like standardized testing weren't really being counted. And like the whole application process was a bit of a mess.
Mhm.
And for some reason, I actually got, I can't say for some reason, it sounds so egotistical, but I got waitlisted at UC Santa Cruz, but then accepted into UCLA. And so I think part of it was I was 17 and butthurt that they had, waitlisted me. So I was like, well, I don't want them anyways. But I think I was also very surprised to have gotten into UCLA. Again, like I don't know anyone else who's been homeschooled who has gotten into it. And that's not like an ego thing, but it was more like I just wasn't expecting it. I didn't think that I had, the academic rigor or the grades or the coursework to kind of show, UCLA that I could, survive here. But I think at the end of the day, it seemed like such a good opportunity to go to such a, like a top school. And I think at the time too, I was more STEM focused. I was more interested in doing research. I thought I was going to go here, do environmental science. I always knew I wanted to minor in conservation biology. That's part of the program is you choose a minor. And it seemed like those classes were very like applicable and interesting. And I did think that there was a chance I was going to want to go to grad school and pursue like wildlife research
Mhm.
more seriously. And so I think at the time it seemed like a pretty good fit. I think it's just been over the years where it's one of those things where hindsight's 2020. There's lots of things I can
Mhm.
complain about now, but I think at the moment, you make the decision with what you best think will suit your future.
Mhm. Can you tell me a bit more about your journey in hiking and backpacking specifically? I know we talked about it at the
Mm-hmm.
start, but how was it in high school or in school? And then did it increase or decrease when you entered UCLA? Because then it's like, oh, there's this new thing that I've got to do, which is research, which is not super on site always. It's in the lab
Yeah.
sometimes. But what was the journey, first of all, of hiking?
Like I said earlier, definitely started with like small little hikes just to kind of get outside and like see nature kind of in its full. And then it became one of those things where it's one of those boxes that once you open it, at least for me, the box kind of stayed open and kept growing. And so I started realizing, oh, you can go a little bit further and you can get out to a totally different ecosystem, especially in California. I mean, like, what better place to be in if you want to get into hiking and exploring? And so it started being, I went up as I think, senior in high school, maybe junior in high school. I went up to Yosemite. I'd been a couple times as like a little kid with my family. And it's a place I remember as being like cool, but it wasn't like some insane place. But I remember going up towards the end of high school and being pretty mind blown at like the landscapes and the mountains and being like, this is some place I want to come back.
Mhm.
And that was like, whenever that was, I think right before I was 18, I went back and I had a really amazing, I did a little solo backpacking trip. I think that was really influential. And that's one of the reasons I've sort of clung onto Yosemite as a sort of like home
Mhm.
point for me outside of like Southern California. Um, but yeah, I think throughout high school, I just started getting more and more into it as partly like just like an outlet. It was a way to sort of get away from all of the stress, especially I think after like COVID hit. I think everyone started getting a little bit more outdoors because
Mhm.
what else could you do? And I think I took that sort of to more extremes where I was trying to get out like every weekend or a couple times a month, and I was trying to backpack as much as I could and hike as much as I could, just because I felt like it was by far like the best way for me to really kind of de-stress, be able to collect myself. And it was just something that I enjoyed so much because it all felt so new and exciting too, where it was this whole world of, landscapes and trees and plants and animals and so many firsts too. It's like the first time I ever camped alone was terrifying, and
Mm-hmm.
I remember coming back and be like, no, 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 like it wasn't that scary, but like no, like I was pretty scared. I remember not sleeping well, and there's been nights where it's been really cold, and then you're like, oh, I'm never gonna be able to sleep in this, and then you just sort of build up, adaptability and resilience. And I think it's the confidence thing too, where you realize like, okay, like I went out and I backpacked by myself and I survived. Like not everyone can do that, and it's not necessarily like an ego thing, but it's a confidence thing where, I'm sure as high schoolers always are, like we're all insecure and we all have things that we're worried about. And so to have something to sort of cling on to and be like, okay, if nothing else, I at least have this thing that I love and that I can sort of build off of and grow in, I think felt really exciting too. And that's why when I got to college and I think my academics just consumed so much of my time, I think I was just doing really poorly, like mentally and like socially. I didn't know where I totally fit in, and I think I had a pretty rough like first quarter. And that's when I think one day I was like, what if I did like a big through hike or something? And then I was like, no, 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 like that wouldn't be feasible. And then I started just kind of like poking around and looking into it, and it's one of those things like just go see if it's possible. And I realized like, okay, like I can take a quarter off of UCLA and I can go hike for 5 months straight. Like that would be awesome. And so that's exactly what I did. And so yeah, I would definitely say post high school was what really when things, especially coming to UCLA, I think that's when I started taking it much more seriously and started realizing maybe my future wasn't going to be as academic as I originally had planned, and maybe it wasn't necessarily. It's not like I felt. Let me take that back. I think I kind of realized that it wasn't a waste of time to be prioritizing running and hiking and backpacking when it was something that I really did feel like I had a future in, and it wasn't just like a hobby for right now. And B, I think starting to really realize how critical it was for my mental health. And I think it gave me the sort of balance that I needed to not drop out of college and to continue, still making sure I finished UCLA.
What was going in your mind that first quarter when mental health was at a low point?
I think it was just a mix of, as I'm sure a lot of people experience at UCLA, it's just a lot, I think, overall, to be thrown into some pretty tough courses. I was in, calc classes that had coding portions that I've never seen this sort of math. And even though I had taken calculus, it was like a whole different like world of like research specific math. And then I was in LS 7A, which is like microbiology and stuff, and it wasn't even something that interests me too. I think that was the frustrating thing too, is I came to college being like, I love trees and the outdoors, and then I was like, here's some math, look at this, like gene or whatever it is, and it was all this stuff that didn't feel like it was super applicable. And so I think I was frustrated at that. I think I was definitely very frustrated at myself because I felt like I wasn't succeeding academically, and it being at such a competitive school, it felt like everyone else was doing really well, even though in reality, especially now that I'm a senior and I'm looking back on it, like everyone was suffering, everyone was struggling, everyone was putting in the hours, and at the end of the day, like it's just hard. And so I think I felt that I had made some sort of wrong decision freshman year. I remember calling my parents and being like, I'm gonna drop out, like this isn't for me. And they have convinced me many times, as have all of my friends, not to drop out. So yeah, I think first quarter was just really rough mentally, just not feeling, having big imposter syndrome and having, just a lot of like, do I belong here and is this the right choice? Just a lot of doubt.
What was your biggest insecurity back then?
I think I had a lot of just academic, like I just didn't feel very smart. And I think that's a common thing here, is because also it being a freshman, sophomore in the life sciences meant that you're with a lot of people who are planning on going to med school, which isn't my personal goal. And I think that's something that I recognize now, of like, people are going to do better than you, like unless you genuinely are the top in your class, like there will always be someone that's better than you. And if you're comparing yourself to the best, these kids that are going to go to the best schools in the nation are going to become incredible doctors, and that's not my future in my past. So I think in the beginning I didn't recognize that, and instead I was like, I'm stupid because all these people are doing better than me. And I had no sort of deeper recognition of what that really meant and what that, like how that actually applied to me. So I think it just felt stupid.
I've totally felt like that so many
I think
times.
everyone has.
Because I came to college And I came in as an environmental science major, um, and I wanted to do environmental engineering. I took the first environmental engineering class, and I was like, "This is engineering. Where's the environmental, man?
Exactly.
Like, this is all just math and chemistry." And even though it might be super important, that's not what I was looking for.
That's exactly
You
how I
know?
feel. It's one of those things where it's like I understand why it's in the program. I understand how important it is to have that foundation in your maths and your science, because at the end of the day, we're getting a BS. That means you need to be doing the science, right?
Yeah.
But I think it was one of those things where I was like, okay, but I don't care. Like at the end of the day, like teach me about trees, teach me about the dirt, you know?
Uh-huh.
And so I think, yeah, it's hard to do well in classes too, where you just don't feel like it's something that applies.
Yeah. Something that I almost like follow to the T now. It's actually a phrase that I made for myself. I didn't look at it anywhere, but it's better is worse, different is better,
Yeah.
and you are different.
Oh, I like that.
You know, I
I
really
think it's
follow
very true.
that because every time I try to be better at something, I just think it's a losing game.
It
When
is.
you say that you're trying to be better, you're already putting something in a ranking. And I don't think you've got to beat somebody to be good at something. You know, like
Exactly.
I think everybody can be better if they're just themselves
Yeah.
and just doing what they want to do.
100%.
There's if that wasn't the case, all of the world's problems would have been solved by now. But
Exactly,
that's too many
right?
problems
Right?
to solve still. Uh, that makes so much sense. Thanks for sharing all of that.
Of
I'm
course.
really interested to know when you made that decision of hiking for 5 months in the forest. That sounds like a big decision to me. What was
Yeah.
going through your head that then?
Oh, absolute stoke. I was so excited. I think it was one of those like dreams that I had had when I was younger when I realized it was a thing, but I thought it was for like crazy people and I was like I could never do that and like I could never hike for that long or do those sorts of things. And then as I got more into more hiking and it was something that became less of like a fantasy and more of like much of like a desire, and it was less like I was admiring people and more like damn, like that's something I really want to do but I don't think I can. And then the second I realized that I could do it, like I remember the day I got my financial aid award where I was like, okay, like I have enough money to do it. Like
Okay, bye
the
guys.
numbers, no, literally, I was like, the numbers check out. I remember the day that I clicked the little button on my UCLA that says like declare, you know, like it's like declare 1 quarter absent or something.
Uh-huh.
And you know, all I had to do was click that, and I knew, okay, I'm not signed up basically for the next quarter of college. Like I'm not showing up, you know, next week or whatever it was. And I think I was just so excited. I immediately started doing tons of research, which was mostly just watching YouTube videos and watching other people hike.
Yeah.
But I think I was so excited, and it gave me a lot of motivation to sort of stick out school because it felt like it was a good balance where it wasn't like I was putting everything I loved on hold for 4 years to do this thing that I didn't really care about just to get my piece of paper. It was like, okay, I can go to a 4-year university, I can get my degree, and along with graduating in 4 years, I can still do this major thing that I really want to do. And I think finding that balance was super key in allowing me to be successful in both like academics and in like my personal passions.
It makes me remember of a story of how I don't know if you've heard this story, but horses who are running in a steeplechase, they have like these their eyes are blocked from the sides so
Yeah.
that they don't see the other horses running by them,
Yeah.
and they can only see the road in front of them, and so that they can keep running. Why I say that is, do you think that more people deep down below want to do something like this and just want to take a gap, but they're like, oh, the other horses are running and I'm going to get left behind, so I better keep running?
No, that's a really good analogy, and I think it's 100% what it is. Is you know, like I said, that button exists on my UCLA, and it's really easy to click. I'm just putting that out there. But I think it's yeah, you see everyone else, and it's a big. I mean, I even experienced it's a big FOMO of even just leaving quarter for college and leaving your friends. Just the social aspect alone, I felt like I was worried about the FOMO more than I should have been. But yeah, I think it's a big part of it of like, okay, but what about your academics? You could always just be doing something. You could do an internship. You could do something, you know, kind of more quote unquote like productive with your life. But I think I push it so hard on all of my friends and everyone I kind of meet. But I totally think that you should take off, even if it's just like a month or a summer or something. Go do something. It doesn't have to be at all related to your field. Go do something that you love for just a little bit of time, because I think it gives you a really deep perspective. And I think it's one of those things that can help show you whether or not you really are on the right path for that moment. Because I think I've seen people who have gone out and do these sort of things, and especially in like say like the PCT, where a lot of people start, but most people don't finish it. A lot of people realize halfway through that that isn't something that they really like doing. It's something that was good in idea, but not in practice. And that's not a bad thing, because it means that they took the risk, they tried it, they realized it wasn't for them, and really they needed that stability in that house or whatever it is in that job. Versus for me, it was the opposite, where I went out and it confirmed like, okay, like I am on the right track. This is something I love. And I feel like it's one of those things where unless you take that risk and you put yourself into a situation that you don't know the outcome of, you're never going to know if you're on the right path. And I think here we're so focused on the outcome of everything, in the sense of, using that, it's like a sort of the same scenario of like the PCT, and everyone's like, well, if you're going to hike for 5 months and, your goal is to reach the end, yeah, your goal is to reach the end, but your goal is really the 5 months. It's what you're doing in between. And I think if more people kind of step back and appreciated the process and, it sounds cheesy, but appreciate the journey, I think you'd get a lot more out of, kind of everything. But no, I definitely think more people should consider doing something.
I told you about my running expeditions recently, right? A realization that I had by the time I ran 5 or 6 times. Oh my God, these bees. By the time I ran like 5 or 6 times was every time I got in like 10 minutes, and then I was like thinking about I've got to run 20 more minutes. I ended up doing worse.
Yeah.
But every time I was like, there's one more step, there's one more step, there's one more step. And just about the journey of just looking at just one step ahead and just following that, it felt much easier to do as well. So I feel like if you
100%.
just focus on not the ultimate end goal and know how far away you're from that, but just say that this journey is long, but it's actually just one more step, it becomes much easier, right?
It really does. I think a lot of people, I'm known to hike quite a lot in a day. And so like there'll be a lot of days where I'm doing 20, 30 miles and people are always like, how can you do 20, 30 miles? And I'm like, well, to be honest, when I start a day, I'm never like, 10 minutes in, I'm never trying to think about the fact that I have 30 miles in front of me. Usually it's, especially when you're backpacking, it's like, okay, I have 4 miles to my first water source. And then I'm doing 3 miles and then I eat lunch. And then after lunch, now, I only have 3 more miles to my next water source. And then it's like 4 more miles to camp. And then it's all these teeny tiny sections. It's never 30 miles, because that's a lot of miles. You know what I mean? And so it's that sort of thing where if you think about the whole thing, it's overwhelming, it's intimidating. You're probably not going to enjoy it as much because you're just stressed out about how much it is. But I think taking a step back and being like, oh, I really only have 3 miles. And it's half of it's just gaslighting yourself, totally. But
100%.
right? But like at the end of the day, it works, because at the end of the day, it keeps you focused and it keeps you, more present in the moment. Because at the end of the day, what is the fun in hiking 30 miles in a day if all you're thinking about is the end of that 30 miles and it being done with, versus you can appreciate the fact that you get to hike for the next 2 miles along a stream and it's beautiful. So I think kind of appreciating the good and the bad, but also, just staying in the moment is super critical.
You know what? The brain is really dumb and smart at the same time.
It is. It's so stupid sometimes.
It's so stupid because it's so easy to fool yourself very easily. Like if you tell your brain that and almost like put it in a delusion state that, it's not much, it actually does believe that. And then you can keep on going.
Yeah, no, I think I tell a lot of people too that, and a lot of my sort of like, I don't know what you want to call them, athletic pursuits or whatever, but I always tell people, I'm like, I feel like the physical part of it is sort of like the side quest. It's very much a mental game. It's not, the physical is very secondary, I think, to the mental game that it is.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so the PCT is the Pacific Crest Trail, correct? And you did that when you said the 5-month forest hike. Tell me what that was like. Obviously, you saw YouTube videos of it being, oh my God, the Pacific Crest Trail. But it really is downs and ups, and it must have been hard. What was the 5 months like? I need details and stories.
Oh, totally. I love it. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about. I think ahead of time, it's talked about a lot how it's easy to romanticize it and be like, oh, you get to live in the woods for 5 months and you get to see all these beautiful things and meet all these cool people. But at the end of the day, you're sweaty and you're gross and you're dirty every single moment of 5 months. And so it's it is hard. And there are times where you cry and you have really, it's saying like, I think one of the common kind of sayings is you'll have your highest highs and your lowest lows. And I think that's really true because when I started, I was really fortunate because I live in Southern California. My parents were able to drive me down to the southern terminus, which is the border of Mexico and California. And so I started there in a place called Campo. And then it was one of those things that we were just talking about, but kind of being a little overwhelming and being like, okay, like I'm about to start hiking and I will be stopping in 5 months essentially. But
Yeah. You
I
say
think,
bye to your mom and dad for
yeah,
five
literally.
months.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy just being like, okay, like I don't know a single other person on this trail. I don't know who I'm going to meet and just start hiking. And I remember the first day being pretty intimidating. I took, when I started at the terminus, my parents actually took a photo of this Australian guy that was starting the same day as me, which is funny because we didn't really see each other the entire first day. He started up like 20 minutes before me when I was saying goodbye to like my family and everything. And I just didn't really see him the first day. And then like the second and third day, we ended up crossing paths a couple of times. And then we ended up hiking the first like 700 miles together, essentially. We hiked the entire desert section, which is pretty much just all of Southern California. And I think it's one of those things where I think we all have those experiences where you see this person and you don't really think anything of them. And then the next thing you know, you realize you've spent this amazing amount of time with someone. And it was really cool because within that, there were so many other people that we met, we got to talk with. Just like I've talked about a lot, but the community is just, it's so, so incredible. A big part of through hiking, or not a big part, but one part of it is something called trail magic. And trail magic is just anything kind of nice that someone does for through hikers. And this can come in the form of, a lot of times it's someone offering you a cold soda. It's someone offering you a place to stay for the night. Someone offering you a ride to town and that sort of thing. And I think it shows you truly the best of people. When I first proposed that I would tell people that I was doing this hike, people were very scared for me. Oh, what do you mean you're going to hitchhike into town? What do you mean you don't know anyone else and you're going to do this solo? And I think I had the most opposite experience anyone could ever have of that is instead of feeling fear, every single person I met, and maybe this is being naive, but every person I met, I was so excited to talk to and get to know because I'd had so many continual good experiences. And not that everyone was perfect, and every once in a while you would meet someone who was an asshole or who is, not a great person, but the overwhelmingly majority of people that I met were just so incredible that I think it kind of shows you like truly the best in people, and I think nature really does that. But trail magic was such a cool thing because you would meet someone, you talk to them for 5 minutes, and they'd be either impressed with what you were doing or they just knew about PCT hikers. And I'd have people who would literally be like, I'll drive you to my house, you can take a shower, you can sleep in a bed, I'll feed you dinner, and then I'll drive you back out to the trail the next day. And it's insane because I'd be like, wait, what's your name? Like, I don't know who you are. But I think that was such a major part of it, especially early on when, you are scared and anxious and it is very intimidating. There's a lot of doubt and there's a lot of anxiety surrounding it. But then the year that I did it last year in 2023 was a particularly intimidating year. It was the highest snow year on record for the Sierra Nevada mountains, which is already known to be the most challenging section of the trail. And that's what go through like Central California on the eastern side. And there's a place that everyone who's going northbound. There's a place that everyone kind of stops right before you hit all of the snow in the big mountains. It's called Kennedy Meadows South. And when I got there, everyone that I've been hiking with, including the one Australian guy, everyone I've been hiking with up until that point had decided they weren't going through the mountains at all. They're instead going to flip up to Northern California and then come back when the snow had melted later in the year.
Because it was so hard.
Because it was so hard, and people, it was also just very dangerous. A lot of people, because again, it was the highest snow year on record, and so it wasn't even like there were great things to compare it to. You could compare it to the other high snow records and talk to people who had done it then, but at the end of the day, no one really knew. And so it was really intimidating. But I remember being really stubborn and really determined. I was like, well, I'm going to go through it. And so when I got there, I met I started talking to people and chatting people up and being like, hey, do you want to take someone else on your team? And I very thankfully ended up in this group of, originally we were a group of 6 people. And we started out a couple days after we had gotten there. We all left, starting the mountains, hoping to get through, like, I think it's technically like 400-mile section. And when we started out, let's see, the first morning we had together, we saw what were like pretty positive as mountain lion. And that was a pretty intimidating experience. That's one of my best, I think, trail stories is we were all hiking probably about 4 a.m. And I was in like the middle of the group and there was a couple ahead of me, and a couple people behind me. And I remember you're walking along the trail and you look down the ravine and I see these really big eyes. And I'm like, okay, like there's clearly something pretty big down there.
Yeah.
It's either a massive deer or it's like a bear or a mountain lion. So I yelled to the few ahead of me. I go catch up to them. We're all looking down and we start yelling to the couple behind us being like, hey, like, be aware, there's something really big down there. and they see it, and we see its eyes like turn and lock on them, and it starts running up this ravine. And so they do what you're supposed to do, which is make yourself really big and really, intimidating. They're banging their hiking poles together, they're screaming, and the rest of us are just kind of frozen, being like, oh, like, what are we supposed to be doing right now? And thankfully, about halfway up the ravine, maybe it like turned and it ended up going off. But it was definitely one of those like 15-minute or 15-second experiences that I'll definitely never forget. But it was definitely the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Was specifically this, like, there's probably like the 350-ish mile section that was just totally brutal. Everyone on our team was super experienced. I was by far, I think, the least experienced person. And I was also the youngest by a considerable amount, which was a little intimidating, I think, on my end, because I didn't want to be the burden. I didn't want to be the liability. I didn't want to be the reason anyone got hurt or had to like bail out. But not fortunately, that's not the word I'm looking for. But our group had a lot of mishaps in the first couple of days. So after that happened, there was a Finnish couple who had extensive snow hiking experience. And one of the girls ended up getting severe, like pain in her Achilles. And so she ended up getting really bad tendonitis. And so I think 3 days in, her and her boyfriend that she was hiking with, they ended up having to stay behind, and they dropped out of our group, and they ended up having to flip ahead eventually because they couldn't continue on. And then I think on the 4th day, we lost another member of our group. There's 3 big hiking trails in North America that are known as the Triple Crown, and it's the Pacific Crest Trail, the Continental Divide Trail, and the Appalachian Trail. They're all multi-thousand-mile hikes. Mm-hmm. And this guy had hiked the other 2 trails, so it wasn't like he was an inexperienced hiker. And 4 days in, he was like, screw this, like, I'm not going through this. He also just decided, we were all moving a lot slower than we had wanted to or predicted, and so he was like, I don't think I have enough food, I'm bailing out. So now it's me and these 2 other guys. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of, this is 4 days in to our first little like stretch. And I was like, there's no way, like, we're going to make it. They're like, these people have all dropped out. Yeah. Like, what are the chances of the other 2? And thank God, the 3 of us were kind of like, okay, like, we're going to get through this thing. And so it was very efficient based. And so it was like, we would go to bed at 5 or 6 p.m. We would wake up at 1 a.m. We would start hiking by usually 2 a.m. And we would stop hiking. We originally, like, because normally when you're hiking, you base off of miles. You're like, I want to do 10 miles today. I want to do 20 miles today, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And that just wasn't feasible. The conditions were so difficult that we were setting what we thought weren't super, like, ambitious goals as far as mileage went, but the terrain was so challenging because it was continuous snow. We had really full packs. When I left that first kind of station, Kennedy Meadow South, I think my pack was about 50 pounds, and the other 2 guys were carrying 50, 60, 70-pound packs. And so it was just such a massive amount of weight. We were moving so slowly that we were macing it off of hours. And so we generally were trying to hike for like 10, 12 hours a day. And so we would start at 2 a.m. and generally we would finish by between like maybe 1 and 3 p.m. That gave us a couple of times to set up our camp, which was normally on snow. And that was not usually very pleasant. We had ice axes and crampons, like full snow gear. And you would have to like dig in our tent stakes in the snow and hope that they would stay, and they would freeze over overnight. And then in the mornings, you'd have to take your ice axe at like 1 a.m. and you'd be like chipping out ice to get out your stakes. My tent has a couple of holes in it, I won't lie. There was one point, I remember that morning being a bit of a low point, where I pulled my tent off of the ice, and it had been so cold that my tent had kind of frozen to the ice, and there was a chunk of my tent that just ripped off. It just stayed frozen. And I remember looking at it and being like, no way, like my tent just ripped because it got frozen to the ice. But it was pretty brutal. We were going up mountain passes that not a lot of other people, like no one was really out there. And so we would go up these major mountain passes where there really were some serious no-fall zones where if you slipped, like, there was a pretty good chance you're not going to make it, you know. Exposed rocks were always a big issue because you wouldn't see them because they'd be buried under the snow or partially buried, and they emit heat along with like anything biological. Obviously, like a rock is going to absorb heat faster than everything else, and so they create really dangerous pockets of air and snow that you could fall into. I know multiple people who were airlifted out. I know someone who had, you know, like a log, like a splintered log literally go through their knee and stuff like that, where it really was pretty treacherous conditions. But at the same time, I don't know if I'll remember anything in the rest of my life the same way that I remember that, because looking back on it, I feel like I'm not focusing as much now that it's been so long too. I feel like I don't focus as much on how hard it is and I think about what a incredible, like, once in a lifetime experience specifically that section was. I remember we got to Tuolumne, which is sort of like the eastern side of Yosemite, and you can really only get there via a couple of roads unless you're hiking in extensively from somewhere else. And all of the roads were closed really late into the season because of all the snow, which meant that when we went through Tuolumne, like, we really didn't see anyone. And I remember kind of thinking, like, when is the next time I'm going to have Yosemite National Park to myself? And it was such a special experience seeing all of that kind of stuff and having no one else out there. It felt so intimate knowing that. We felt so lucky that we got to experience that and see that in a light that, for all we know, no one ever will. Because again, it was a record year. It's a once in a lifetime, once in history sort of thing. So I think that whole section I remember very fondly. And I think the two guys that I went to, I'm still both really close with because they like totally carried me through the whole thing. And it wasn't like they were like, obviously physically carrying me, but I think our kind of team felt so strong by the end because we had all pulled each other through so many hard points, so many low points, so many dangerous situations, whether or not it was a creek crossing and one of us was about to get, like, we were scared of hypothermia, or we were going down a mountain pass and it was me trying not to cry because, if you slipped, you're about to fall down 1,000 feet. And so I think that sort of connection too was really special because it really felt like a team. And it was obviously by the end we were close and we were friends, but that's what it truly felt like, as we had created and been successful in forming this team where we were able to do this thing that people told us was impossible. There was a lot of people that at the time were like, oh, no one's going through this year. Oh, you think you can go through? Like, how much snow experience do you have? And I'd be like, oh, like, I got my snow equipment and I went up to Big Bear over the winter and I practiced before anyone knew what kind of snow year it was going to be. And so I think I could tell by just looking at people, even if they weren't saying it, like, you could tell how much doubt people had that not just me, but like anyone was going to make it through. And so I think making it through and then going into Northern California, it was like definitely a huge confidence boost. Because after that, I was like, there's nothing else the trail can do that would get me to quit. Because if I didn't quit in this whole section where everyone else did, like, there's nothing else that could throw at me. And of course, the mountains like to humble you, and things like to do it. Northern California was a super strange kind of section because me and the two guys that I was hiking with, we decided to split up as a group just because we all had different goals for the end of the trail. One of the guys originally thought he was going to go a lot faster because he had to go to grad school, and so he was going to try and kind of like power through a lot of it. And the other guy had the opposite idea where he's like, I want to slow down, I want to enjoy it, especially after all of like kind of the work we've been doing. I want to really just enjoy the trail again. And I was kind of somewhere in between, and I think we all just wanted kind of our independence and autonomy back. And so we split up, and it ended up being a lot of like long periods alone in Northern California. And I think that got pretty mentally challenging, where sometimes I would go a day or two without seeing anyone. And the people that I did see and people that I did connect to maybe didn't have, again, like this kind of the same goals, where I would wake up the next day and I'd be like, oh, like maybe we'll camp together tonight. But then they were like, oh, I'm going to do 12 miles. And I had maybe, plan to do 20 or 30. And so then I would never see them again. And eventually I caught up to a sort of little bubble of people that I ended up sticking with for a bit, or at least would see on a pretty regular basis. And I think that was really critical. But finished California, that was a massive thing. If you're hiking from Mexico to Canada, California is literally like, it feels like it's 2/3 of it. It's a massive amount. And so getting to the border of like Oregon, and Oregon is known as kind of the easiest part of the trail. And so it was really exciting knowing that I was going to get to a place that was so pretty, but also hopefully a little bit easier. And getting to Oregon was awesome because this was also one of the times where I started getting into more the athletic side of it, where I started pushing really high mileage. And so even though the trail might have been easier, I have a habit where I like making things difficult for myself. And so I just made it more difficult by trying to see how far I could push it. And so I got into this group of people where everyone was doing pretty high mileage. And so by the end of it, especially by the end of like Northern California and especially by the end of Oregon, I was doing maybe like 28 to 35 miles every day. And it was awesome, but definitely really exhausting. And then by the time I got to Washington was another one of those big ego checks, because I was like, people say, oh, like, Washington's hard, but like they don't know what I've been through. And of course, I was wrong. And Washington was really, really hard. Even after being able to do like 30 miles a day, there were days in Washington where doing 20 felt like so exhausting, and it just took so much longer. The terrain was really hard, and like all of the miles started really catching up to me. I started having really severe foot pain to the point where about halfway through Washington, I like physically really couldn't walk. And it happened in the span of like 3 or 4 days. I think it was a combination of like my feet swelling. I tried foolishly some different shoes, and they were not agreeing with my feet, which is how I ended up with the sandals you're seeing today. Yeah, at one point I'd actually gotten the sandals earlier on the trail. At some point in the snow, I started getting scared my feet were going to start rotting, and I was really scared of getting trench foot because my feet were essentially continuously wet for like, 5-ish weeks. And so I was really scared of that. So I'd gotten these like super, super cheap sandals at this random place, and I didn't really think I was ever going to like hike in them. They were purely just for when I got to camp to dry out my feet. And when I got to halfway through Washington, at this point, in case you can't tell, I'm really stubborn to the point of maybe stupidity sometimes. But I was like, I just want to finish this trail. Like, I need to just kind of get through it. I need to get done. At this point, I was also like, I want to get back. So I have like a week in between, then and then going back to university, because that was such a big transition. And so I didn't want to try and like order shoes and deal with that whole hassle. I also didn't have any faith in any shoes because like my feet hurt so bad at that point. Like the only time they didn't hurt is when I wasn't wearing any shoes. And so I put my sandals on one day leaving a town, being like, hopefully I can at least like make it to the next stretch. And then the next town, I'll at least try and find shoes or something. And I put the sandals on and I hiked in them, and I was like, well, this kind of works. So I ended up hiking the last maybe like 300 miles, maybe like 250-ish miles in these basically paper thin $9 sandals that I had gotten, and they worked. But I got a lot of strange looks from even other hikers who are like, everyone else thinks these other hikers are crazy, and they would look at me and be like, you're kind of like batshit crazy. Because I'd be hiking these like paper thin sandals, and we'd be going up in like northern Washington is it's crazy. It is so rugged. It is really remote. And so I'd be, it'd be like raining for 2 days straight, and I'd be like slipping on the mud in my, stupid little sandals. But at the end of the day, I was making the miles. I was getting there. So it wasn't like anyone was going to say anything. But no, it was just such an incredible experience. And then when I got to Washington, I think one of my kind of saving graces was the younger guy that I had hiked through the Sierra Nevada with, the one who was going to go to grad school. He had also had some foot issues, and so it slowed him down more than he thought. And so we ended up being in Washington right around the same time. And we ended up hiking pretty much the entire state together, which was awesome to get to do it and finish with someone who had been such a critical piece of, I feel like, my success in the journey. Because that's the whole thing too. Like, I was the one who hiked, but at the same time, like, I wouldn't have gotten through without the community and without even like the support back home from my friends and my family, continuously. I think it was, I don't want to say it's like a group effort, but at the same time, it's one of those things that wouldn't have been possible without everyone else. And so getting to finish with someone who felt like such an important part of that was really special, and also just so motivating having, essentially at that point, like having someone who was a really close friend to encourage me when I was like about to cry and break down because it's 9 p.m. and for some reason we were still hiking and I was so tired. But I think the community, the scenery, everything, it just made it, the most incredible 5 months of my life for sure. So that's a very quick rundown of 5 months of hiking.
I need a moment right now. Let me just go through some of this. You were going through some problems in freshman year of college, so you decided to do the hardest thing that I've heard an in-person tell me. This is insane.
Thank you.
What? First of all, crazy. Like, I want to shake your hand right now. Like, please shake my hand.
Thank you.
That's
crazy is my favorite compliment I've been getting as of the past couple of years. So thank you.
Amazing. I cannot imagine a lot of things that you talked about, but I, for one, am a person who believes the more experiences and the more hardships you go through and the more tests that you go through in life, the stronger you become. And I don't know how strong you are now. Like, I probably don't even know. But I'm interested to know, what is the one thing that you learned about yourself and about life through that experience?
Excellent question. I think I could probably ramble on a really long time for this, but I think about myself, I think I gained a lot of confidence. I think that's like the number one thing I really take away, is I went in as this very kind of insecure and not really sure of myself person, and came out as someone who was like, even if there's a day where I don't like how I look, I don't like the grades that I'm getting, I don't like how I've interacted in a situation, I have this concrete thing of like, my body can do so much, my mind can do so much, and I have this sort of like, again, like concrete proof of what I can do, and it becomes very unshakable. Where even, and it's not perfect, it's not like, now I'm floating through life, but if I do really poorly on a test, I can be like, okay, like I know this isn't my strength, and that's okay. It means I can work hard. I know that I can work hard, and I think that sort of drive too has been really important. And about life, I think that's to chill out a bit. I think, like, it sounds like oversimplified, but I think a lot of people would benefit so much from just stepping back and realizing a lot of stuff isn't as serious as we take it to be. And maybe that's partly just me and my life choices and my decisions. And, again, grades aren't as important for me because they don't affect my future as much as someone who's going to like med school. But even just in like day-to-day things, like people get bothered by small inconveniences all the time, me included. I like to complain. But trying to remind yourself, like, maybe it's not that deep. Maybe it's something that can be worked out. Maybe it's something that will be okay. And I think that's true. There's a saying, sounds really cheesy, but trust me, there's some hard times where it starts becoming really real, where people who hike a lot, and especially through hike a lot, say the trail provides. Especially when you're living out of your backpack, you don't have a lot. And so you have to kind of just trust that things are going to work themselves out, even if you don't see it in the moment. And I think that's something that I really try to apply to my life is like, take a step back, calm down, like things will work out, like, life will provide a door, even if it's not what you necessarily think it's going to be. Like something will come around.
Yeah. Awesome. How was the transition coming from there back to this campus of 40,000 college students back into the place that stressed you out so much? How was the transition like? Because you were off so much technology, being
Yeah.
around students, being around different social circles. All of that goes away when you're testing yourself. So how was the transition like?
Honestly, it was a little rough for sure. I think I sort of romanticized it when I was on trail because, it was really exciting to think of the fact that I was going to have like a bed. And because I was going from dorms to apartments, I was like, ooh, like I can cook real food that doesn't just involve like boiling water and stuff. So I think I really much like romanticized it and kind of forgot about a lot of the challenges that come back with being in Los Angeles. A lot of that, it just feels like the pressure and the stress. And I think that got to me really quickly when I got back. I hadn't done school in 6 months at that point. And so to be thrown immediately into high level, what was I been doing at the time? I would have been doing like some physics and stuff like that, where it felt so unbelievably hard, which seems crazy, I think, coming from doing something that felt like really hard, but it felt like a very doable, productive hard, to going from that to like physics, where I didn't really see the point. I felt like I was really bad at it and I just didn't really enjoy it. So I think like the academic transition was definitely rough. The social transition was definitely, I think, hard too. I don't know a lot of people who are necessarily like through hikers or, do see a future in the outdoors. And so coming back and trying to kind of stand my ground in my mind to myself and be like, I'm making the right decisions when I'm seeing everyone else, especially coming into junior year last year, seeing everyone else get these internships, get these job offers, or get into these like honors programs or whatever it was. Whereas like they're setting themselves up for a very specific kind of success. And it felt like I wasn't in some ways because I wasn't necessarily putting my time into those sorts of things. I think one of the biggest kind of rough transitions was losing the ability to be active for like 12 hours a day. I think is something that is not just like an emotional thing, but it truly is like a chemical thing. When you work out, you get that, and you get those hormones and that release. Whether that's people talk about like runner's high and that sort of thing, but just in general, it's a very scientific thing where if you work out and you're active, you are releasing hormones and chemicals in your brain that do make you happier. And so I think coming back, it's actually a well-known, at least in the trail community, it's a really well-known thing. It's called post-trail like depression or post-trail like blues, where a lot of people come back to their like 9 to 5 or college or whatever it is, and you get genuinely pretty depressed. And so I think for me, I tried being like, okay, like I'm going to set new goals. I'm going to make sure I have some academic goals, make sure I have some like, kind of like physical pursuits too. So I started getting a lot more into running, started putting a lot more time into climbing and that sort of thing. Obviously hiking and backpacking when I could. And then I ended up getting injured. I think like maybe early mid October, which is right after school started, right after fall quarter started, and I think that was um, really difficult because then I had kind of lost any outlet to do anything physical to the point where like I couldn't really walk to class for a while, and so I think that took a pretty massive toll on me mentally. Just kind of, it felt like I had lost so much going from that back into the academic world where I couldn't even do something as simple as run or walk.
Yeah. I'll talk more about that injury soon, but I want to know how important is it? Is it in a current student to have an experience such as that tests them to that extent? Like,
Yeah.
why cannot I just do traditional college, just be on my laptop the entire day, I guess, or not even just study or just do academics all day and make it through college? Why not just that? And why is it important? Or is it actually important for every student?
I definitely think it is. I think variety is the spice of life. I think UCLA, we all get very bogged down in the theoretical, the research, whether or not you're doing art projects or you're doing STEM, it doesn't matter. Like you get very focused on whatever it is that's very externally driven, but via grades, pressure, parents, teachers, professors, that sort of thing. And I think having something that's like a big goal that's also hard, but something that's very internally motivated, I think is super important. And it doesn't mean you have to go take 5 months off and, do the PCT or, hike some insane thing. But it can mean like maybe you're setting a physical goal of maybe you want to run a half marathon. That can be just as intimidating and as powerful, I think, as a massive hike, and maybe something that's more realistic for a lot of people because I do think I think the key is having a challenge that is internally motivated makes such a big difference because you're proving something to yourself for no other reason than for yourself. And I think that's sort of the main difference between just, pushing yourself academically and maybe in a career sense versus making sure you're doing stuff truly for yourself.
Makes sense. And then you also have this other side to yourself. Obviously, we talked a lot about hiking and stuff, but the academic side and the research side, tell me about you being in a lab, all of the work that you do there, and how has that balanced this very physical side?
Yeah, so again, when I sort of first entered, the college world, I definitely thought I was going to focus a lot on like wildlife and conservation in that sense. And so right before coming to college, summer after senior year of high school, I went and I spent about a month in Peru at a research base where I was a research intern where I mostly did a lot of learning. So I was taking in a lot from all of the researchers, and I had opportunities to go out into the Amazon rainforest with a machete and, bushwhack and everything and set up camera traps and go through footage and learn about how data is processed and learn about a lot of the field work side of it. And so I took that the next summer and I went to Ecuador, and they needed someone to be a research intern to do like a survey of animals on this one like reserve. And so I went and I did that. And I think that was also like an incredible opportunity. But that one was a much more like balanced mixture of field work where I was going out and half of my day was me setting up these cameras or checking these cameras or doing whatever. And then the other half was me sitting in a little tiny mosquito office, and I was going over like papers or I was looking up research stuff. And I think it gave me a more realistic sense of what the field sort of looks like in the sense of it's not all the fun hiking, setting up cameras, looking at animals. A lot of it is involved in a lab under a microscope or behind, a keyboard type of a paper.
Yeah.
And I think I kind of realized that I didn't want to do that. And I think after that, I came back, and that's when I sort of started switching gears career-wise. But my first 2 years at college, I also worked as I don't remember what my official position was technically called, but I worked in a zebrafish lab here on campus where it was my job to take care of all of the fish and clean tanks, and I would cultivate brine shrimp that I would feed to said fish.
Oh, wow.
But I think that was a really cool experience too, because that was very like academic research kind of stuff. That wasn't fieldwork based stuff. But it was cool getting to talk to researchers about their work and their projects. But it was the same sort of situation where I was like, whoa, this is really cool, but this isn't something that I see myself being passionate about in 5-10 years.
How did you
And
get
so-
those opportunities?
That one was genuinely just a work study job. I looked into the listings on like my UCLA, and it was the most interesting job. I was like, I could do that, or I could do food service, or I could work at a library. And I was like, you know what? I'll go feed fish. That seems like a better opportunity. And I started that one probably like the same day I started my first class. Like it was right during freshman year. And I liked my job enough, I liked my boss, and I liked the work enough that I stayed for the first couple of years.
Yeah.
And then I quit when I went and did the PCT, and then came back, and I've been doing a couple of other kind of miscellaneous jobs since. That's how I got the opportunity. The other two were unpaid research internships, and the key being unpaid, aka they're not that hard to get. The world of conservation is not a well-funded one, which means that most internships and most programs you're either paying to go do or you're just unpaid work, and so they're not very competitive. So I will say that it wasn't like I was fighting 2 billion students to go get this opportunity.
Yeah.
It was very much like I contacted them and I signed up, and they were like, yeah, you can come down.
It's
But-
crazy how this feels like an opportunity of a lifetime, but you're saying it's easy to get.
Well, in the sense of, because it kind of is. Like, there aren't a ton of people who are willing to pay for their own, like, room and lodging to
Right.
go live in the Amazon where you're getting bit by hundreds of mosquitoes every day, and you're going out and you're doing really strenuous, like, whacking through the jungle and trying to get to this random GPS point to put a camera up. Like, it's not glamorous work at all. And I think because there isn't money in it, it's not very competitive.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't like again, it was literally unpaid.
Okay.
So it wasn't very competitive, no.
Okay. A lot of students come in to UCLA or very research oriented universities with the idea of doing research and working in labs. A lot of them don't really realize what it is like working
Yeah.
in it actually. It's just the idea of, oh, I'm going to
Exactly.
be into research in a lab. Can you tell me what it feels like being in a lab inside, not the fieldwork part, but just working in a lab?
I feel like I can't speak like too specifically about this because my only experience really being in a lab was my fish job, but like in that it was just me. I wasn't really doing the lab work in the sense of I wasn't like doing the research part of it. But yeah, it's not very glamorous either. I mean, I was cleaning fish poop out of fish tanks for however many hours my shift was, or I was
Yeah.
cultivating brine shrimp and trying not to kill people's 10-year-long experiments. Yeah, it's definitely not super glamorous, and I think that is a lot of the work is not, fun stuff. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And I feel very strongly that everyone, I think, who wants to pursue any sort of career should go out, and even if it's an unpaid position, like go out and do that work to make sure it's work that you actually want to do. I feel like I see so many people go through college and they chose, like we all do, they chose, a major at 17 or 18, thought that's what they're interested in, graduate college, and now they feel too locked into it to try anything else. And I think instead, like, take opportunities, just try things. At the end of the day, like, it's not going to kill you. Just go do something else, even if it's totally obscure, totally unrelated. Just try it, because if you don't like it at the end of the day, all you've done is learn something about yourself. You now know that you don't like that thing and that you are doing something that maybe you enjoy more. So at the end of the day, you eliminated that option. And I think that's really important, because at the end of the day, I realized I don't want to spend my whole life in a lab, and, I don't necessarily like the academic writing portion as much.
Makes sense. You talked a lot about how community and the people around you were really important supporting factors in you actually doing a lot of internal changes as well. What is the community like here at UCLA for you? Does environmental science as a major play a big part in that?
I think my biggest community here, I would say I have like a really close group of friends that I've had since like freshman year. They're like always been like my roommates and the people that I probably spend the majority of my time with, which is a little funny because most of them aren't super outdoorsy, but it makes them the perfect roommates because it means we get to come home, we get to do all the fun city things and that sort of thing. And I think that really balances well with my other sort of main community, which is mostly stems from the UCLA Backpacking Club. I think that's such a phenomenal community. And the outdoors community here at UCLA in general is actually, I would say, really strong. We have some awesome stuff between that, like climbing team. There's a lot of other like hiking and camping clubs too that are phenomenal. But I think UCLA Backpacking Club has been a pretty big community, especially last year and this year, as far as having people who are not just passionate about the outdoors, but are passionate about the environmental education side of it, and a lot of different facets of the outdoors and like recreation and that sort of thing. I've also found it in my kind of new job, which is I work as an employee for UCA Recreation, but specifically for the outdoor adventure sector. And so right now, that mostly just means that I'm working at the Gear Rental Center, which you should go definitely check out if you ever need camping or hiking gear.
Yeah.
But it's a fun job, and it's a lot of just talking to people about the outdoors. People will come in and kind of treat it like office hours and ask about like hike recommendations and that sort of stuff. And it's really fun to just kind of get to do that. And it feels like you're building a sort of, community across clubs and across different sectors of UCLA. And especially like the backpacking club is really fun because you'll have people who are planning on going to med school or who are engineers and people from every single possible major and background. But at the end of the day, you're all coming together to go outside. And I think that's really awesome because it doesn't matter. You don't always have to be like environmental science major to be someone who's super passionate about the outdoors. And I think that's really cool too.
Yeah. There's 6,000 people on the Slack channel for the backpacking club. That's almost, like, what percentage is it? Like 20? Not 20. Maybe around 20%
Yeah,
of what UCLA is. That's insane, first of all.
It's massive.
But it tells me when everybody is very focused on academics and very focused on science and math and so many like non-outdoorsy majors, there are a big chunk of students who want to at least experience what it feels like backpacking and being outdoors. What is the backpacking club like for you, and what does that signify to you?
I think it's one of the most I'm obviously very, very biased, but I think it's one of the most special kind of parts of UCLA, at least it has been for me, because kind of what I was saying earlier about the aquarium and my favorite part being seeing people click with animals and seeing people kind of click with different environmental things. It's the same thing where you'll have someone who's coming from an engineering background whose future doesn't necessarily lie in the outdoors, but by getting them to kind of connect with nature, or at least, trying by taking people outside and seeing people kind of click and have that emotional response, I think it's something that people can take into their careers and into their personal lives and maybe be a bit more environmentally conscious or try and apply that to their future. I've even seen people like fully change career paths and be like, whoa, the outdoors is really cool. Like maybe I will try and do something that's more like specific in that. And so I think it doesn't matter what your background is, whether or not you're going to med school, whether or not you're an art major, like it doesn't matter. I think nature can have such a big influence in that and bringing something positive, even if it's not, like your everyday life, even if it's like the only time you ever go outside or the only time you ever go backpacking or hiking is with, backpacking club. I think it's something that's super memorable and something that can be taken and really applied across like every possible facet, and every single major here I think could benefit from having that sort of emotional connection.
Yeah. Why don't more people get into outdoorsy careers then? Is it because of money?
I think money is a huge part of it. I can't lie. I don't see my future ever making a lot of money. And I think I've totally accepted that and I'm fine with that. But I understand a lot of people's reasonings for wanting to have more stability, because I don't necessarily have that same stability career-wise, because I don't have like an active internship or something like that. A lot of my work will probably end up being freelance. So I totally understand a lot of people's reasonings for wanting to have that stability. I think it's also, again, it's not super glamorous. A lot of people don't like being dirty all the time and maybe appreciate, a soft, warm bed and, I don't know, like a heater and air conditioner. Those all are kind of nice things. And so I think it's definitely like a harsh environment and there's just not a lot of money in it. So people, it tends to stay as, I think, a hobby more than anything else for most people.
Paint me a picture of the ideal future that you would want to have for yourself.
Oh, this is a good question. I feel like I should do this for myself more often. I think directly after college, and this is partly just like plan and partly maybe just like hopes and futures, but I think directly after college, I plan on just kind of bopping around for a bit, probably living either out of my car or doing seasonal work. I really want to focus on pursuing the athletic side of hiking and running right now. I'm trying to get really into trail running, and that's where I feel like a lot of my passion sort of intersects. Alongside that, again, I'm really passionate about photography. And so I think my ideal sort of world would be one where I can do a lot of running and hiking while supporting myself money-wise via like photography. So I do some stuff now like photography wise, but a lot of it's obviously like doing senior portraits or like family stuff, that kind of world. But I've also started breaking into the sort of like outdoors side of photography. And so I do have stuff where I have gotten to take landscape photography pictures that have gotten published in a couple of random miscellaneous stuff. I've gotten to work with a couple of different brands taking pictures and videos for like a guiding hiking company, for some product photographies for another like hiking company. And so I've kind of, now that I'm kind of deeper into this world, I've gotten opportunities there. And so I think that's where I hopefully see my future lying, is one where I get to essentially spend as much time as possible challenging myself by hiking, running, and climbing for extended periods of time, and then just supporting myself by doing something else that I love that I think maybe can provide slightly more cash.
What if it doesn't work out?
Oh, that's okay. I think we never know what the world's going to look like. I think people a lot of times ask me, well, what if you get injured and then you can never do any of this again? And that's definitely a possibility, but at the end of the day, none of us know what the future looks like. So I think it's one of those things that I'm not going to stress about it. It's one of those, we'll get to that, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. If this doesn't work out, I think I could always, in theory, I could always go back to school and go to grad school and study, research and wildlife biology. I think I have the background and, the academics to do so if I wanted to, which is honestly the reason I have stuck UCLA out and I haven't dropped out, because I do realize the value in that. So yeah, maybe it won't work out. I don't know, but that's a worry for later. If I start stressing about that now, I won't be able to enjoy any of it.
Yeah. You know what? If there's any time to take risks, according to me, it's now.
That's what I see.
I hear people saying, oh, why don't you secure yourself through working at a big company for 5 or 10 years, and then you can get into entrepreneurship, which is what I want to do. And I'm like, wait, if entrepreneurship is risky and I want to do it right now, isn't that the best time to do it? As if it doesn't work out,
you can always
the
get a 9
easy
to 5.
option is always there,
That's what I always think, is at the end of the day, if it doesn't work out, I can get a 9 to 5. Like, I can do things. Especially this past summer, I worked as a cook in Yosemite and had like the time of my life.
Really?
And at the end of the day, I never thought I was going to be a cook. I applied to every single possible job just so I could live in Yosemite. And so I think if I wanted to, I can go being a cook in Yosemite, and I know that I would be happy. So I think knowing that there's other things that I can do, that's fine. I'll figure it out at some point.
That sounds so fresh of an opinion in today's world, where everybody's like, I want to be a software engineer. I'm like,
and
not another one.
retire by 40, and then you can go do things. And I'm like, I don't know if I'll make it to 40. None of us do.
Yeah.
So why wait? Like, if I want to do something right now and I'm really passionate about it right now, why would I wait to go do it? Maybe that passion will burn out, but I would rather use it now than try and support myself some way I know that I probably won't enjoy, just to maybe do it later if I'm still interested in when I'm retired and I'm 60 and I don't have the energy to do it.
Yeah.
Who knows?
I wonder how UCLA has supported you through all of this, as a college as well as a community, or as in whatever ways possible.
That's a good question. I think the students have been awesome. Like, there's just been so many incredible, I know, lifelong friendships that I've made. And again, like building that community, whether it's through like the backpacking club or through just, the people that I met freshman year on my dorm floor. And that's something that is truly invaluable. But I think academic-wise, maybe I'm not always appreciative of how hard UCLA pushes me. But at the end of the day, I think it is, important that I do have that sort of pressure. And I think that's kind of neat, having to work harder than I would if I was, learning something on my own, knowing that it's dependent on a grade that I have to really work for. So I think there's that necessarily in the just like building resilience and building strength mentally. I think UCLA has done a good job of that. As a school as a whole, I know we all have our, praises and critiques about UCLA, so I probably won't dive too far into that, but I think overall UCLA has done a pretty decent job at supporting me. I think maybe it wasn't the best school fit, but at the end of the day, that's one of those things, again, hindsight's 20/20. Maybe I would have gone to a different school that I think now would have been a better fit, but maybe it would have been worse. Maybe I wouldn't have found that same community or those people, or maybe the lack of academic rigor would have meant that I didn't learn as much and that sort of thing.
Let's say another aspiring college student watches this podcast next year and says, I want to do exactly what Jess did. Would you tell them to come to UCLA to do that?
No, I would not. I would probably, if someone truly wanted to do exactly what I'm doing, which is, a future that's not academic based, I wouldn't see the point in putting yourselves through 4 years of in my opinion, pretty highly rigorous, academics. I'd be like, go to a school that's maybe more tailored to your interests. Look at the course load. Again, maybe I wouldn't have done this had I known I was going to be taking, just the amount of, chemistry and physics and that sort of stuff, which I didn't necessarily enjoy and isn't as beneficial. Look into a program that you feel like fits what you want in your future. And I think that's a better way of looking at it than just choosing it based off of the major title or, those sort of things.
Yeah. And then segueing into your love for photography, um, how did that start? Does that have to do anything with the injury that you were talking about? Because I feel like photography, apart from all of the physical activities that you do, maybe doesn't require a lot of physical activity.
No, definitely. I've been in photography since I don't know. It's probably like I was really young when I think I first got handed like a little point and shoot camera, and I would take silly little pictures of like leaves and stuff. But I was probably like 8 or 9, and took a lot of really bad photos before I started getting the hang of it. A lot. I started getting more serious about it or taking it like more seriously, probably when I was early high school. I had a friend who at the time was trying to be an actor, so I took like headshots for her, and that was pretty exciting to like do that. And it was being submitted to like an agency, so I was like, "Ooh, like I'm a professional photographer now." I wasn't. I'm a little bit better now, but I think that started becoming something that was more intertwined with like the outdoors when I realized like, oh, I can take my camera outside and I can take pictures of all the places that I'm seeing, and then I can show them to people. And I think that was really where that kind of got mixed up in it. And now it's like, I think a cool way and the best way I have to sort of show my love in a very visual way. I'm not good at other art forms, so this is what I got.
When you look at a photograph that you've taken from before, how does that make you feel?
If it's a photograph that I'm proud of, or just a place that's has a lot of meaning, it feels very special to kind of have that. I'm like, even in my room for the past quite a few years, I always have a lot of my photos up from like my adventures and my hikes and stuff, and I think it's a way of sort of staying connected to all those places, because you see them and you're immediately taken back to whatever the situation was in that moment when that photo was taken. I think that's super special.
If you could go back to little Jess, who was just maybe 10 years old, and her parents told her that you start crying when you're not outside, what is one thing that you would tell little Jess?
Oh, I think the only like main life advice, everything works out. Don't stress about it. I think we're all really good about stressing ourselves out, but at the end of the day, like, things work themselves out. They always will, because they have to. In the sense of, maybe it won't be perfect, maybe it won't be what you thought it was going to be, but like, life moves on. It'll be okay.
Yeah.
I think that's the main message to 10-year-old Jess, and maybe to everyone.
How do you rate your mental health right now?
I think a lot better than it was when I was probably younger. I think I feel much more like in control, and I know like things I can do to make it better, and I know things. I think now I've sort of accepted that I found the thing that I really love, and that if I want to keep my mental health good, I need to prioritize that, even if I feel maybe like I'm lazy for slacking off on my schoolwork and that sort of thing. I know at the end of the day, which is more important, my mental health. And so prioritizing that, by prioritizing the things I know that improve it, or at least keep it, nice and stable, I think is important.
Biggest fear right now?
I think at the end of the day, there is always the doubt of, am I going to regret my decisions at the end of the day? Like, am I going to see everyone else get their big boy jobs, and am I being naive in 21? I think that's probably my biggest fear. Am I being essentially naive about life?
How do you cope with that?
Doing it anyways.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things where, the whole like, oh, if you're scared, do it anyways. So I think that's what I try to kind of embrace. Is it's going to be uncomfortable and weird or whatever, but
Okay.
I'll get through it.
Cool. What is your approach to your own life, in the way that, how do you define self-worth in your life?
I think self-worth is what you make of it. I think for some people, it's the same sort of thing about like success. Like, what is success? And I think it's whatever you make out of it. I think self-worth means knowing that you're contributing something important to the world, even if to other people it might seem insignificant. As someone who's worked a lot of fast food jobs, I was considered a critical worker during the COVID-19 pandemic. So, maybe I was getting paid minimum wage and I was working at Chick-fil-A, but at the end of the day, someone thought I was important. And I think it's the same sort of concept of, it's easy to look down on people and be like, they're not doing enough. But it's also easy to be like, oh, they're still working their hardest. And I think pushing yourself, but giving yourself grace is important. But I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah. My last question is, what is the unique Jess message that only you can give to everybody who might watch this podcast?
My motto that I've been telling myself is every day is a good day to be alive. And I think that's what I try and kind of carry in my day to day, at least. I think the reason I say it is it's easy to be like, today is a bad day. But at the end of the day, you're alive, and thus it's a good day. Because at the end of the day, it could be worse. You know what I mean? I don't know. It sounds overly simplistic and maybe it's, mildly morbid. But at the end of the day, every day, I think is a good day to be alive. And always keeping that in mind when things get tough is the way to guarantee that you're going to have good days too.
I was reading Meditations by Marcus Aurelius recently, and something that he said in part with the Stoicism lifestyle is every night when you kiss your daughter goodnight, tell her that she might not wake up the next day. Which is...
I don't know if I would be quite that harsh.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's a harsher way of saying it.
But at the same time, it's the same message of it's really easy to get bogged down in like, today's a bad day because it took me 45 minutes to get my lunch. But at the end of the day, like, it's not a bad day. It's a bad moment. And you're allowed to have bad moments. You're allowed to have, bad times. But every single day, there is something to be grateful for. There's something that went right. At the end of the day, there's always something that went right because there's always something more that could go wrong.
Yeah.
And maybe it's too black and white to look at things, but at the end of the day, sometimes it's what you need. Sometimes it's a little tough love.
Cool. You guys have any questions? No? Yes?
No.
Long story.
Yeah, how? What? Okay.
You're not normally dressed like this?
No.
I'm kidding. You don't normally come to the botanical garden. Honestly, that's fair. Maybe I shouldn't have said that sarcastically.
Any question, Lutza?
Not really. I grew up in Utah,
Huh.
and so we have like crazy snow, insane mountains
Yeah.
all the time, and it just feels really good to hear someone here talk about that setting.
Yeah, versus like here in Los Angeles, we're like, oh no, it rained today. I guess we'll cancel classes.
Yeah.
Literally last year, like the streets are flooding, no classes, and I'm like, come on, guys. Like I'm from Southern California, even I'm like,
That was so funny. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you.
of course, thank you guys. This is
All
a
right,
really cool
Jess.
opportunity.
Thanks for being on Acknowledge.
Of course.